komme med. Jeg føler at vi trenger det. Vi kommer til å prøve å ha sånne her type foredrag cirka en gang i måneden, for vi har frokost hver mandag. Og da er dere alle hjertelig velkommen tilbake igjen, fra høsten av i hvert fall. I dag så har vi bedt vår egen Erling Løken Andersen holde en presentasjon om hvordan man holder investorpresentasjoner. Så da overlater jeg ordet til Erling.
Takk. Nice to see so many today. I'm going to do this in English. I hope you won't object. Some people here only talk English. So the talk, well, first of all, I have to say it's cool to see so many people show up. I guess that's what you do when you promise people lots of money, indirectly. So the talk today is called How to Attract the Investors, then Convince Them You're Not a Loser. Because that's actually what it's all about. My name is Erling Løken Andersen, and I'm a web designer since 1999, and then I became an internet entrepreneur in 2005. I worked in Schibsted and Cappelen Damm, amongst some, and then I also started a company called Biip.no in 2005, and we sold it for 75 million to Egmont and TV2. So what have I raised? I've done quite a bit of fundraising myself. We started with Biip, which was a strategic investment from a company in the niche. Then I did which was 1.5 million, and then I did some other stuff. This is just kind of to give you an overview of what I've done and to assure you that I've done quite a bit of pitching in my life. And I also participate in two incubators and accelerators. One is called Tink, which is arranged by Innovation Norway. And one is called Plug and Play Tech Camp, which is arranged by Plug and Play Tech Center in Silicon Valley. So in total, I've raised nearly 10 million kroner. And I'll tell you how I did it today. But first, right now, I want to talk about where we are. We are at Mesh, which is Oslo's premier innovation hub. Here we have 150 entrepreneurs in 90 companies from 25 nationalities. It was founded in 2012 by Audun og Anders. And we offer spaces and co-working memberships starting from just 1,190 kroner per month. So that's the plug-in. The goal of this presentation is kind of two things. One is to give you the tools to successfully raise funding for your project. And number two is professionalize Norway's entrepreneurial scene. And that's quite important for me because when you're in Silicon Valley, and I've stayed there for several months last year, there's kind of a mantra that goes around saying, pay it forward. And that's really a part of Silicon Valley culture, is that if you is taught something, you should teach it on. And that's what I'm trying to do today. And that all of you should also think about that. If you get some kind of benefits or help from someone, just try to pay it forward. And help the next guy in line. If you want, you can tweet this. I'd appreciate that. It serves as advertising for Mesh and this talk. So please do. I use the Silicon Fjord hashtag. We have roughly 55 slides to go through, so I'll try to keep this quick. So let's begin. I'm going to start right at the bottom of everything and then build us up. So some of you may already think this is stupid and you already know this, but please just hang in there and I'm sure you'll learn something new. So let's start. What kind of types of investors exist? Well, the first class of investors are private investors. And that really consists of three types of private investors, mainly. You have financial investors, angels, friends, fools, and family. And then I put crowdfunding in parentheses, just because crowdfunding usually attracts private investors. Then, of course, you have company investors, again divided in financial, industrial, and accelerators. You have government grants, which we're lucky in Norway, we have quite a bit of. Grants, loans, and incubators. And the last source of funding is, of course, yourself. Your savings and loans that you take to provide funding for your project. So let's break it down first. The first type of investors are private, and they're divided in financial, angels, And friends, fool, and family. This is probably your mom. And that's a typical financial investor, a guy who has a lot of money and invests in various types of startups and projects. Then we have a typical angel, Kevin Rose, started dig.com. And then, of course, your mom. So what characterizes the financial investor? Well, he's looking for a financial gain. He treats the investment in an economic manner, and he invests in almost any niche. Then we have the angel, which is a semi-professional. He often invests with their gut and tends to invest in their own professional niche. Just to clarify the definition of an angel, it's usually a guy who sold the company and then starts investing in lots of different startups. I've done this myself. And then you have friends, fool, and family, which is usually not professional. They are ruled by emotion and trust, and they come with both benefits and disadvantages. We'll talk more about that later. Then we have the company investors, and a lot of people tend to focus on company investors. Company investors are financial. They're also looking for financial gain. And this includes investment companies and VCs, such as Northzone and Creandum, two of Norway's leading VC companies. Then you have strategic industrial investors. They're players in a certain niche. They often do defensive investments. And to kind of understand this niche, you can think of Facebook buying Instagram or Electronic Arts buying Playfish, because that's a strategic investment. They're not doing it purely for the money, although that's also very, very important. They're doing it kind of in the defensive mode to try to protect their own maternal company, such as Facebook, right? And the last company investor is Accelerators. And they take a small stake in your company, gives you a small investment, and they're looking for long-term financial goals. They make a lot of bets, and only some of these are successful. They're prepared for you to fail, but they're pleasantly surprised if you don't. And they include, for example, Y Combinator and Plug and Play. Here are some Nordic VCs. So when you're raising money from VC companies, specifically, these are the guys that I would talk to first, because they know the market. They know probably some of your friends or maybe some of your business associates. So these are kind of the first guys you go to if you want to raise money in Norway or Sweden or Denmark. Some of them are really good. For example, Northzone invested in Spotify. I think they got like 1,000 times their money back already. And how do VCs work? And this is quite interesting, because talking with VCs or trying to get any kind of investment, you have to understand their mindset. Where are they coming from? What are they looking to get out of the arrangement? So VCs get their money from something called LPs. And LPs is a pension fund, usually. So what happens is that when you have your money from your pension on your bank account and you want to invest this in, you know, your bank gives you like 3 alternatives, at least they did for me, like high risk, medium risk, and no risk. And then the profits are based accordingly. Well, what happens is that this LP, your pension fund, gives money to a VC, and then the VC establishes a small fund, and then they divide the money from the funds on lots of different startups. So when talking with the VC, you have to keep this in mind, because he's he wants to cover his own ass in terms of his investor, which is the LP. So he can't afford to make lots of mistakes. So you have to kind of give him the assurance that his investment in you won't fail, because he'll have to answer to that to somebody else. And that is also the reason why lots of VC companies, usually they don't do single investments, meaning they don't invest in you if they're the only ones doing it. Usually VC companies want at least 2 or 3 other VCs to participate in your round, because that gives them an excuse if the investment falls through. Then they can tell the LP, hey, I wasn't the only one who fucked up, this guy also did it. So that's kind of important to kind of have the mindset of the people you're talking to. And then we have government grants. They are also divided in 3 parts. You have basically just a grant, which is free money. We have stuff like SkatteFUNN, IFU, and Etablererstøtte. I've gotten lots of SkatteFUNN through the years. It's a good source of support from the government. Everybody should check out that. And what SkatteFUNN is, they give you 20% back on any investment you do into innovation, basically. Then you have loans. You can get loan from Innovation Norway for different types of projects. And the last part of government support is incubators. And they don't take a stake in your company. And it often even comes with an entrance fee. And their goal is kind of to accelerate companies in a desired political niche. So we'll talk more about incubators later. So I divided kind of this lecture into 3 or 4 parts. And if there are any questions now, you can ask, because this is supposed to be kind of an interactive presentation. So if anything is unclear, please feel free to ask. Yes?
You said that usually the investors, they want several investors to invest at the same time.
Yeah.
I've heard and worked with investors, and they usually say, I've heard the opposite, that they prefer to be one, especially the bigger ones, so they can have full control over the company.
Well, if you're giving full control of your company to investor, then you're doing something wrong.
No, full control of the company, but full control as an investor.
Yeah.
If they invest $10 million, they want to have 20-25% of the company, and there are two investor companies, they will like to have 20% each, and then you sort of scoop the thing give away 40% of the company.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it depends.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I heard that you said so you have to be several, but
No.
it also depends a little bit on
Yeah, absolutely.
what kind of investors you have. For instance, Grandum, I would assume they will go with several different investors.
Yeah.
Of course, it probably also depends on the stock.
I pitched to both Grandum and Norzone, and both of them said we want co-investors. So I think it depends also on the project, maybe. And if it's low risk, maybe they want to do the entire investment themselves. I don't know.
Yeah, I pitched to Grandum and they said we want to do it ourselves. So.
There you go. That's a good sign, maybe. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
Which one do you prefer or recommend in terms of financial compared to government money?
Well, I would say if you can get government money, take it and run. But, yeah?
There's a maker space down in Oslo.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting with him last week, and he told me he did a small. It costs 100,000, cost him 30,000 to get.
Yeah.
In reports and
Yeah, it's true, but he still made 70,000. Yeah, there are costs associated with any of these things usually. So you have to think about it. But it kind of depends on the project and how much you believe in it and everything like that. But I would always take the government money first if you can get it, because it doesn't have too many strings attached, except lots of reporting. Yeah, it kind of depends on the project. So what do you need to start pitching to people and trying to get investments? So this is the first take on what you need. These are my suggestions. I would have an ID plus a company. I would have a business plan plus a budget forecast, and I'm going to tell you why you need a budget forecast later. Then you need a 13-slide pitch deck. I'll tell you why it has to be 13 slides later. And then you need to start pitching the right kind of people. So those are the 4 elements that I personally recommend. But there are other people have other suggestions, of course. This is from venturehacks.com, a really good source for pitching information and how to get financed. They say you need an introduction, typically an entrepreneur or investor. You need a high concept pitch, like 3 words, like Flickr for video. Then you need the elevator pitch, which is like 100 words. A 10-slide deck, and getting past no. That's kind of their take on what you need to start getting funding. But what do investors look for? And this is something most entrepreneurs doesn't really understand, because I get hundreds, or not hundreds, but at least tens of people coming up to me and saying, hey, I have a great idea for an app. And in my world, you're not an entrepreneur if you keep saying that. Because entrepreneurs don't have ideas, they build businesses. And that's two completely different things. And investors are on the side of the entrepreneur. An entrepreneur doesn't necessarily have a good idea, but a good business opportunity. And that's also what investors look for. There are lots of bad ideas out there with brilliant execution. What's, to take a Norwegian company, what's Skeidar differentiator? Nothing. Nothing. It's just a furniture store offering good furniture to low prices. And investors look for return on their money and the highest possible certainty of success. The chance of success in the execution of the idea is strengthened by a good team. So all of these companies are great investment opportunities, or were at some point, maybe not Dagbladet. But that's kind of what investors look for. They don't look for good app ideas. So please, if somebody tells me one more time about a good app idea, I'm going to kill myself. Mark Hedlund says, for investors, the product is nothing, and I totally agree with him. The product is nothing. Norzone says the same thing. It's less about the idea, more about the team behind it. Thinking outside of the box is not difficult. Implementing outside the box, on the other hand, is what will make or break an idea. And that's really important to understand. Your idea doesn't mean anything, your execution means everything. So let's talk about the individual parts that you need. Venture Hack says you need a high concept pitch. So what is a high concept pitch? Sequoia Capital says, summarize the company's business on the back of a business card. And that is kind of your high concept pitch. Some examples: Friendster for dogs, Tinder for shoes, YouTube for music, Flickr for video, and so forth. You need to kind of simplify your idea so much that an investor can kind of hear your high concept pitch and understand what your business is. Questions so far?
Is there anyone in particular you would turn for smart money? So if you want from a particular investor who actually gives you additional advice in addition to just the cash?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but I would say my best advice is to look for companies that are in your niche and perhaps wants to make a defensive investment, or kind of at least understands your category. So for example, Schibsted Vekst does a lot of investments in media companies. And that's really the easiest way of getting money, I would say, in the media niche, because they really want to find the next media jewel. They have the money, they know the category, and it's a much easier sell than going to Creandum or Norzone, for example, because they also understand the niche. They're professional, of course, but they're kind of looking at all kinds of investments, whereas Schibsted Vekst only looks at a specific type of investment. So I would say that's easier.
As an entrepreneur, how do you find the budget numbers for expenses? You're not experienced in it.
Yeah, I have a really good method for that. I taught myself it years ago. You do like this. That's all you can do. And a lot of people working at Mesh come and they ask me, hey, how do I do this budget? How do I make this? How do I make it look good? And you can only just guess, and nobody's ever going to arrest you on a guess. You just say, well, this is an estimate, and that's it. And that's how you do it. In all my years, I've never had somebody challenge the numbers I've set forth. Nobody will ever say, hey, this looks 10 times as much. As long as you used your logic creating it, I don't think you'll ever have any problems presenting something as an estimate, as long as you're clear on that. Where you will have problems is when you say this is an estimate and it's like 10,000 times higher than anybody would expect. Then you're going to have problems. But as long as you kind of keep it balanced, I don't think you'll have problems just making an estimate.
So you kind of talked about getting beyond no.
Yeah.
And so do you mean trying to convince the person that you're talking to say yes, or do you mean just like, okay, screw those guys, I'll move on to someone else to get them to say yes? And if so, like, how do you recommend doing that?
The best way I can answer that is something I was taught myself when I was in Silicon Valley, and somebody said, if you get no from somebody, turn it into a positive situation and ask them, okay, sure, you say no, But I'm sure you know lots of people in this valley. Maybe you know somebody who will do an investment in this niche. Because that's the easiest way of getting a recommendation and an introduction to somebody, is from somebody who says no. Because then you can ask, hey, maybe you know somebody. And usually they'll be like, yeah, I might know a couple of people. And then you get a really good introduction to someone from a negative situation.
Do you have the exact same experience in Scandinavia? Because I think that's kind of the cultural thing in Silicon Valley. When people say no to you, it also means that, yeah, I'm saying no right now, but I know lots of people and I want to pay it forward. I want to help you out. So here are the guys that I can introduce you to.
Yeah.
Introduce like 4 people in one day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It is kind of more Silicon Valley thing than Norway, I would say. Yeah, but it doesn't hurt to try in Norway either. But I would never badger anybody and say, like, if they say no, I would never say, like, okay, let me do the pitch one more time. Yeah. So, I mean, no is no, and you just have to respect it. But something I've learned is that when people say no, you can say, well, can I contact you again in 3 months just to update you on our traction? And that kind of builds some kind of level of trust. And I heard Tellef in Northzone, he said this about Mcash. They finally invested like, I don't remember, 12 million or something in Mcash. And he said that the founder, Daniel, he had told him the same story 5 years. He had been pitching him for 5 years and told the same story. We're going to build a mobile payment solution. It's going to be a mobile, it's going to be fantastic, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually the market was there and everything was ready. And then they went in. But he never changed his pitch. And I think that's interesting. You just have to keep pitching and don't take no as kind of the final answer, because there's always later. Okay. So let's talk about the pitch deck, because that is in some ways the most important thing. So I wanted to introduce you, some of you might already know this, to the 13-slide pitch deck. It was first introduced by an entrepreneur called David Rose. He was the guy who kind of coined the phrase. I was taught it by Nathan Gold, who is a really good pitch instructor, based in San Mateo. And the 13-slide pitch is kind of a simple framework for pitching to investors. And many investors in Silicon Valley prefer and insist on this. So it basically consists of 13 slides. You have your company logo and opening. You have the problem, so you want to show investors straight up what is the problem you're tackling. Then you want to tell them about the team. Then you want to tell them about the market and the market opportunity. And then you present your product. So first you have to tell them, like, this is a problem. These are the guys who's going to solve it. This is what we can make in the market. And here, bam, here's our product. Then you go into your business model. How do you intend to make money? Then you go into strategic relationships and customers, if you have them. Then you tell, and this is really important, about the competition. You have to cover your competition really, really well, or investors will think you haven't done your research. Then you go into barriers to entry and USP, which means unique selling proposition. So basically, what makes you stand out in comparison with the competition. Then you see I put it in parentheses, traction is number 10. You just tell where are we today. If you've launched, you tell them where you are. Then you go into the financial overview, which is usually just the estimate I was telling you about earlier, the budget. Then you talk about how you're going to use the money you raise. Then you tell about what kind of money are you raising, what are you going to raise later, and so forth. And then just the contact info and close. And I learned something one time, and that was, if you tell people something, they will remember it, or I don't know. Anyway, you have to show it to people. So I made a pitch. And I'll show you. So, but first, here's another quote from Northzone. Practice makes perfect. Pitch from day one. The more people you pitch to, the sharper your thinking will be. And that's really good advice. So here is my pitch. It's a pitch for Mesh. I made this in an hour, just so you know. So don't arrest me. I just want to show you the general idea, how this works, and how you could structure a presentation. And if you Google this, you'll find lots of much, much better presentations, but I don't want to pitch those because those aren't my product. But if you Google like Airbnb pitch deck or something like that, you'll usually find the pitch decks from each of the companies out on the market that's become big. So that's a really good idea to kind of see what other people have done. and then just replicate it. So I did this. I found like Airbnb, I found LaunchRock, I found lots of different pitch decks. They're all out there. This is a pitch deck for Mesh, and we are Airbnb for startups. The problem right now is that offices in Oslo are expensive. They often require 12, 24, or 36-month contracts. You have to pay large upfront fees and guarantees, and startups have little capital, and the little capital they don't want to tie it up. So that's a problem right now. The team that's going to solve this is me and Anders. Again, this is not a real presentation, but you need to show who are the key people. You don't have to show your entire team. Just show the key people who are really who the investors need to trust. They don't need to trust your customer representative. They don't need to trust your seller. They need these two people. And then you give like just one sentence of what they've done, and just include some logos, because logos build trust, and it conveys the message much quicker. And usually you put your university too, just to kind of show where you come from. So this is a typical market slide. The market, there are 104,000 registered businesses in Oslo and Akershus. The 7,280 of these moves to a new office every year. I found the statistic online. And then I say, an estimated of these aligns with Mesh target audience. That's my estimate. It's not a guarantee, but you need to make these kind of estimates to kind of tell people what your target audience is. And then I did like a calculation of how much these people pay in rent every year and what the startups pay. Again, these aren't really exact numbers. It just goes to show something. So what's our solution? Our solution is Mesh, which is a 2,500 square meter innovation hub. Houses more than 150 entrepreneurs and more than 90 companies. Consists of a co-working department, 14 individual offices, an event space, a nightclub, and a cafe. So that's kind of our solution to the problem. And this is our business model. I've decided just to break it down in percentage. You can do whatever you want, as long as you kind of need to tell the investor, how are you making money? That's the point of this. So we earn 20% of our money from co-working membership fees. We earn 50% from private office rentals. We earn 50% from revenue from the event space, and then 8 and 7% from corporate sponsors and government grants. So again, it just tells the investor how you're making money. Then we have some strategic partnerships. Of course, this is a great slide for Mesh, because this is a real slide. These are our partners. And it kind of conveys a lot of trust. If Microsoft trusts you, if Selmer trusts you, if Innovation Norway trusts you, you have to be doing some kind of good thing somewhere. And then you need to show your competition. There are a million ways of doing this. This is just my way of showing. I just took all the companies that we're competing against, and then I showed their yearly revenue and their profit. Of course, this doesn't really look good, just so you know, because none of these are actually making money, or at least only this guy. So you need to be smart about how you show your competition, because if I were an investor, this slide would kill me, because it doesn't look like I'm ever going to get my money back here. And then I just wrote something about the future, how we see the future market and the competition, and threw in some logos. This isn't a good slide, but it's hard to make a good slide in the tough market. So you have to think a lot about how you do this. And just to be clear, down here you can see how many slides we are, 8 out of 14. So,
Question concerning competition.
yeah.
Instead, because I've been in many places here, you have Mesh, as you say, you have Kundenesis, you have Post International Hub, and for each of them, they're kind of small places. I mean, it's not something like a big hub. And try to expect in Oslo to have a boom in IT business, for instance. How can you expect that people try to develop themselves when we just working in small spaces instead of trying to make something bigger?
Yeah, I think that is what Mesh is trying to do, to create something bigger. But it's hard. But what was the question?
Well, that was a question because everybody is just trying to start on their side, on their side, and we're just getting small groups.
Yeah.
But instead of trying to, I don't know, try to work together and maybe make a bigger group, couldn't we try to boost the IT business here?
Yeah. Well, I agree that that is what people should be doing. So, yeah. Going forward, you have to show your barriers to entry in the market and your USP. And USP is advertising slang for unique selling proposition. So the barriers to entry here are, there's difficult finding suitable office space. If somebody wants to compete with Mesh, you have to find a really good office space. There's a really labor-intensive startup period. There's a difficult differentiation strategy, because Mesh has established itself as the innovation hub in Oslo. That's my statement. And there's a really low price point for startup offices with few profitable players. Only Mesh is backed by a nightclub, event space, and cafe revenue. So the barriers to entry is really, if it's a tech product, it's much simpler, I would say, because then you are protected. You can have intellectual property, you can have critical mass. There's lots of stuff that can kind of speak in your favor. But here you have to think kind of outside the box to find, okay, why can't somebody else start Mesh tomorrow and start earning money? Then you have the attraction slide, which just shows where you are. And this is a real slide for Mesh, actually, but I took away the numbers. And attraction can be anything. You just need to show like the most important stuff for your business. And for Mesh, that's really our co-working offices part, because that kind of drives everything else. The more people we can attract to the co-working and meetups like this, the more people we can earn, the more money we can earn in the club, the more money we can earn in the cafe, and so forth. So that's kind of a driver for the business. And then you can do some press stuff or whatever. You just need to show that you're moving forward. And then here's the financial overview. And I usually do it as simple as this. You don't have to do it any more advanced than this. This is more than enough. Because this is a pitch deck. It's not like a documentation of your company. If people like your pitch deck, they will ask for whatever generated these numbers. But in your pitch deck, just keep it simple. So this is like semi-correct information for Mesh if we do a really good job. So you just do the income, and you do the expenses, and you do the profits. Simple as that. You don't have to do lots of other stuff and say, oh, we're going to do this much for marketing and we're going to do this and this. It doesn't matter at this level. You just want to see like the big picture of stuff.
How important would you think that it is not to have kind of a hockey stick projection, or does it really not matter if it's backed by your logic? Or if you can explain the estimates, then you can basically put whatever you want.
Yeah. So that's a good question, and it ties in with a lot of stuff. It depends on who you're pitching. If you're pitching an investor, he's more or less never going to be interested in your company unless you have the hockey stick, because that's what the VCs look for. If you're talking with private investors or strategic investors or whatever else, they might be very interested in your company if it just goes like this. So as long as the numbers on the bottom look more or less good, there's a good chance getting an investment. But you're probably not going to get it from a VC unless there's a really big leap. And I'll tell you more about why I think that's the issue later. But yeah, just keep it simple like this. Any more questions related to this? Oh. Then you need to go into use of proceeds, because this is important. If I'm giving you money, I want to know what you're going to spend it on. The company might have some loans to you, for example, 1 million kroner because you didn't take salaries the last 2 years. I want to know if I'm paying your salaries for the last 2 years or if I'm paying your salaries the next 2 years. That's a big difference. So the use of proceeds here for Mesh, we would use 1 million on marketing, 500,000 on new hires, 500,000 on acquisition of competitors, and 500,000 on free cash pool. And this isn't bad. You can set away as much money as you want. You don't have to commit all your money going forward. It could be 1 million free cash pool. It doesn't matter. That's what we need to have to operate. So yeah, Just a simple slide telling the investor what are you going to use the money for. And remember, there's an important point to be made here. Making a pitch deck like this is, to some extent, a legally binding contract. That's important for everybody to understand. So if you set up this, and then you use all of the money to pay old salaries, for example, that could be conceived as fraud. So you really need to think about what am I going to use this money for, and give a true image to the investor. Because you can't change this too much later. You can change it a little bit, but not too much. That could easily be construed as fraud. Unless you have like a line at the bottom saying, PS, PS, these are not final slides.
Why did you have that?
I should have, I just forgot. That's why I'm telling you now. But usually most pitch decks like this have like one slide at the end saying lots of legal stuff. And that's actually quite important in most cases. I studied law, so any document you make and get money based on actually can be used against you later. And then you go to one of the final slides, which is capital request. And I like to do it like this. Just show the investor how is the funding going to go. So we did some pre-funding at Mesh. The funds from founders were 2 million kroner. We established the house, we did the contracts, we did the hires, everything. That's kind of our money into the project. And now we're doing a seed round, which is ongoing. It gives 24 months runway. Equity to grow the Mesh house and increase reach. That's kind of what we're using the money for. And then we might do a Series A round, which is like a bigger capital raise of 5 million. And again, as I said, with regards to making promises to investors, as you can see, I'm not making too many promises here, except that I'm saying that most probably we'll do a Series A round, just so the investor knows this going into the project. Because when you're doing a new round of financing, his stocks gets diluted normally. So he gets a lower percentage than he does going into this project now. So it's a good idea to tell him, hey, your shares are going to get diluted at some point, or you might run into problems. And then that's the final slide. Just your name, your position, and your contact information. And that's kind of a 13-slide pitch deck. And before I do questions, I just want to tell you a little bit about the typical investment run. This is mostly for tech companies, but I'll show it anyway. So the typical investment run is usually an MVP, minimum viable product, which is financed by the founders. Then you do a seed round, and these numbers are just my estimates, okay? So don't arrest me on these numbers. The seed round usually goes from $50,000 US dollars to $500,000 US dollars. After the seed round, you do a Series A, which is 1 to 3 million US dollars. Again, the numbers aren't really, they're just made up. And then the Series B, C, and D are $5 million plus. Yeah, before I go into that, any questions related to the pitch deck?
Are there metrics other than money?
Depends on the type of investor. I guess if you're trying to get the government money, they'll look at much more than the money. They'll look at like integration rate and employment rate and how many people are you going to employ in the year 3 and stuff like that.
But you're in the internet business, right? So you're building things that are not necessarily generating revenue for like 3-4 years.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So what is the traction that you showed?
Yeah.
What are the metrics that you showed? I'm not really an internet guy, so I'm just asking, what would you do?
For an internet business, I usually say you should never milk the ikke melk kalven, melk kua. You should wait until the cow is big until you milk it. So for internet business, I wouldn't focus too much on the profits to begin with. I would rather focus on how many users are we attracting. In other words, visitors. What is the conversion rate from those visitors to paying members or paying customers? How long are they using our site? what is our viral coefficiency, which means like if one guy goes to the site and shares, how many people see the share and comes to the site based on that one share. So I would look at those kind of metrics for a company that isn't like Mesh, an internet business. I would look for those primarily. Okay, so I also get a lot of questions. How do I price my new ID or company or app? It's kind of impossible to answer what your company is worth. So I'll just give you a rough estimate, just something I personally use. So this, I defend this, but you can arrest me as much as you want. This is just my opinion. I would set up a budget for the next 3 years. Then I would multiply your profit in year 2 or 3 with 8 to 15. And use that as an estimated market cap valuation for 100% of the stocks. So let's assume Mesh went 1 million kroner in profits this year. And next year we were doing 3 million, let's say that. I would argue in front of an investor that Mesh was worth, let's say, 10 times next year's revenue. So 10 times 3, which is 30 million. That's how I would like kind of get an estimate of what the company is worth. Because if you're dealing with investors, some of them have short investment profiles, like 2 years, 3 years, and some have long. And let's assume you were a guy buying into Mesh and you're going to sit here for 10 years. Then you would get dividends for 10 years. And if we just kept the level at 3 million, 10% of that, if you bought 10% of the company for 10 years, which would equate to 3 million, which would be your investment if you bought 10%. So you kind of need to think something along these lines. Just multiply your profits next year with the 10. And if you're selling 20%, the investor should pay 20% of the total valuation. In the end, your idea or company is worth whatever somebody is willing to pay. Not too many slides left now, guys. So I'll tell you some venture funding hacks. 3 simple ideas. First, I want to talk about Dropbox. Now, Dropbox is a really cool funding hack because they made a 3-minute video explaining the concept. They didn't have the actual product. They just made a video of it, how it was supposed to work. They launched the video, and the waiting list went from 5,000 people to 75,000 people. And then they got the funding to make the product shortly after of 1.2 million. And now they raised $350 million in their Series C, and then 500 million in debt financing, which is a new kind of investment, type of investment. So yeah, that's kind of one thing you can do is just make a video or some kind of very simple demonstration of what you're trying to build, and then do a waiting list like Dropbox did. Another one, and everybody in Norway does this, is establish an advisory board. Well, some people in Norway do, but not enough. So advisory board is just a group of people who can kind of vouch for your company. They can open doors. They can get you introductions. They can discuss your strategy and so forth. And an advisory board kind of social proofs your company and team. It kind of acts like these people vouch for me, so it's automatically easier for me to be believed when I talk with somebody else. It establishes trust, letting investors know that other entrepreneurs and investors vouches for your company. And usually advisors are typically compensated with stock options ranging from 0.1 to 1% of your company, depending on the profile. Plus you also pay them travel expenses to meetings and stuff like that. It's not a board, it's an advisory board. So they don't have any judicial status in your company. It's just something you do to kind of show that you're associated with good people. And then you do 2 to 4 years vesting, which in Norwegian means, they have to be in your company for 2 to 4 years to get those benefits. So they can't like sign and then take the options and never be heard from again. So I just took an example. This is from LaunchRock. It's a startup for putting up like a splash screen for a new company. And they have like the CEO of Kissmetrics, they have the DuckDuckGo founder, and the CEO of Hootsuite. So they kind of give their name to the company, which makes it a lot easier, usually, if it's the right people, launching money or getting money. Another venture founding hack is what I discussed earlier. You go for strategic and industrial investors. Getting money from the big players in the same niche as you is usually easier than getting money from VCs. Same niche players understands the game you're in and can do defensive investments. And the pro tip here is really look for the biggest player in your niche. They might be very interested in a small stake in a company that represents the future of their own niche. And like I was telling you, Schibsted Growth has its Schibsted's investment vehicle. So they do investments in the media space for Schibsted. They've been hugely successful. And kind of when Facebook bought Instagram, that was kind of the same type of deal. And even when we sold Biip to Egmont and TV2, that was what their main concern was. They were telling us that, hey, we don't know anything about these kids online. We'll buy you because then we kind of get your and get your product, which might be the future of our own business. So that was kind of why they bought Biip. And I think that's valid for all kinds of niches and categories. No, it was a horrible acquisition. It went straight to hell. The year we sold, we had 80 million in revenue and 8 million in profits. And the next year, we were negative with 3 million. So they really screwed, or yeah, we also screwed them over, but that's usually what you see when big companies buy up small companies, that the culture of the company is ruined. And often the people who started it are taken out of their positions and they put in management guys and they fuck it up. And that's what happened to us.
Isn't there, or shouldn't there be a trend then that big companies don't let them be fooled by small ones like over and over again? Say that's usually an outcome.
Yeah. Well, there are of course examples that, like Facebook buying Instagram is a good example of it not happening, at least not to the same extent, because Instagram is still hugely successful. But it kind of depends on the company that buys you. Like, in my opinion, Egmont was a terrible company to be bought by. They didn't have any competence at all in the space. They couldn't even build a website, and then they bought us. It was a crazy operation for them. Yeah.
In that situation, was it also an active hire? Like, did you work for Biip as part of the acquisition, or how did that work?
Yeah, they in our case they bought the company 90%, and then we were forced to continue working for the company, but we weren't really allowed to make any decisions. So they kind of tied us on hands and feet and then dropped us into the water and told us to swim. So yeah.
Would you recommend to pursue people who normally consider your competition?
Yeah, absolutely. As a small startup, you are competing with established players. And often, again, it's easiest to get money from the people who are already in the niche and already know the space. So I think it could definitely be a good idea. So yeah. And yeah, the last venture funding hack is do not ask for money at all or wait as long as possible. And of course, this is the most important thing. You should never try to get money. You should try to succeed. Getting money means giving away control. And I can tell of a month to introduce us to people. And we kind of hold off and we waited. And then eventually we found out that he was basically just a coach. So he was going to coach us on how to pitch. But he wasn't actually an investor, as he kind of sold himself to begin with. So I would say, like, just check people really thoroughly, see what they've done previously, because I found that the people that you can't trust won't tell you what they've done before. So a lot of these financial guys, they say, oh, I've been involved in so many companies, I can't really disclose any of it. That's a really big warning sign, Because if people can't disclose something, then they're usually full of bullshit. So just social proof them and ask for recommendations, or ask them to reference somebody that you can talk with, and see if they've invested earlier, and ask and talk with the same investors that they have invested in. Yeah, I guess that's the best advice I can give. No, not Brønnøysundregisteret. Well, Proff.no, yeah. Yeah, nearly. But, no. Yeah, just check them out in any form you can.